show sponsored by Jock Market, and a big DFS slate today. We've got one MLB game. We've got 3 hockey games, and that's kind of it. There's also college football. I'm not exactly sure what the college football slate is, but I do know that we have college football live before lock later. If you guys are looking for a little bit more DFS action, but in terms of baseball, not all that much to talk about. So if you guys have questions, if there's anything you want to know about Adam or I, if there's any questions about baseball strategy, anything about today's game, now's a good time to ask it because we are certainly going to be able to get to those if you guys have any questions. But other than that, Adam, how do you feel about these one-game baseball slates?
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. At the very least, it gives you something to be entertained by, if you're sweating the game. I think that I used to like them more back when DraftKings first rolled out their product and you had different scoring for relief pitchers. I thought it added a lot of strategy and made it more fun. Now, it's I guess more straightforward, so not quite as fun, but I still think that, I still play. I play cash pretty much every showdown game. I still think it's good enough. So, obviously wish we had, 4 games or something, but still not the worst.
So I'll ask you then, because we've never done a show together for one of these one-game slates. And I agree with you also in terms of the relief pitcher scoring. It used to be pitchers got not double points. It was 1.5 points. So strikeouts were 3 points and the outs were also worth 1.5 points. So it definitely made the relievers more valuable because they had a chance to pitch one inning and still score, 7, 8, 9 fantasy points. I'm going to ask you now with this kind of scoring setup for cash games, I think relief pitchers are generally out of the picture, but for tournaments, how would you handle relief pitchers and how do you go about utilizing them, if at all?
Yeah, so in cash, it's typically not something I need to worry about at all. In tournaments, and like I said, I haven't been playing them, so this is it's more of a theoretical conversation than me saying exactly what I've been doing. But I think that they have a role in tournaments just from the sense, something Josh and I talked about yesterday. Typically, when you look at ownership on these single game slates, you just sort of get the cheap hitters being really, really, really popular, and then the more expensive hitters not being popular. I think where relief pitchers have a role in tournaments is if, for example, today we have 48% of the field expected to play Chas McCormick at $4,400. If you play a 4K relief pitcher, Chas McCormick's going to pick up 0 fantasy points a pretty high percentage of the time, just because that's how baseball works. So if you play a reliever that is likely to come in, they're not going to score 10, 12 points. They're not going to single-handedly win you the slate, but they can put you in a position where you have a very similar build to what is optimal, what the field is playing. But if you get 3.5 points from your reliever and Chas McCormick gets 0, you're in a really, really good spot. So it's not that the relievers are really capable of scoring enough points to help you individually, but they still can beat any individual hitter because it's still relatively likely that any given hitter gets 0.
Yeah, and then talking about some of these pitchers here, and I mean, we can just kind of have an open discussion about what this slate is, some of the pitchers options, the hitter options. And once again, guys, if you have questions, please ask them. Help us help you by answering some of your questions and give us a little bit more to talk about here. But the other thing here that really stands out to me about the ownership is we have the 2 most popular players on the slate, Framber Valdez and Chris Sale. We've got Valdez currently projected for 56% ownership, Chris Sale projected for 50%. And then to your point about the cheap hitters, we've got Chas McCormick projected for 48%, Christian Arroyo projected for 46%. It is not hard to see what almost the majority of the field is doing. It is going to be people rostering the starting pitchers, a couple of cheap hitters. And if you're playing cash games, that is certainly optimal. For tournaments, it's optimal to an extent in terms of maximizing the amount of fantasy points your lineup is projected for. That is also what everybody else is going to be doing. So what do you make of these pitchers when you look at them individually? Framber Valdez, 56% ownership, and Chris Sale at 50%.
Yeah, I think it makes sense just because obviously their projection is going to be higher than any hitter. And you also get more of a floor because assuming neither pitcher gets bombed, you're typically getting, at least a decent amount of fantasy points from them. But I think they're just a lot more valuable in cash games than they are in tournaments when you factor in the ownership. Neither of these pitchers have a good matchup, clearly. Houston's a really dangerous offense. Boston's a really dangerous offense. Valdez doesn't have the best strikeout stuff anyway. Sale has had his share of issues this year too. So I think from a floor standpoint, they are really, really good plays. But when you look at it and think more in terms of ceiling and differentiating in tournaments, I really don't mind getting away from pitching just because you also typically see shorter leashes here. This isn't a regular season game where if Chris Sale, puts a couple guys on base or gives up a run or two in the fourth or fifth inning, where Alex Cora is just going to say like, yeah, okay, keep going. Cool. Like they're going to get him out of the game pretty quickly. And we've seen that from pretty much every team, all postseason long. So I think that, not to say the ceiling is muted on these guys, because clearly they still are capable of going out and putting up a big game. But I think the reason they're getting so much ownership has a lot more to do with their floor and their median projection than it does with, the full range of outcomes. So I think that going to some of those more higher priced hitters rather in tournaments at the expense of a Valdez or a Sale, if you go to Xander Bogaerts, just kind of the first name that I looked at here, 20% ownership compared to Sale at 50%. Really, if like Bogaerts hits a home run, there's a pretty good chance he's beating one or both pitchers. A home run from somebody is really all it takes to get you into that same to get you to the same point where the pitchers are projected. So I think that the ownership gap between the pitchers and the top tier hitters in tournaments is a bit wider than it should be.
Yep, I think that totally makes sense. And I mean, also like you said, the upside of the hitters, there is no situation where pitchers all of a sudden going to pick up 14 fantasy points at once. And then we also have to be concerned about the length of pitchers, which in general is an issue in postseason games, but even more so this year than we've ever seen in the past. Now that we see teams that are a lot more statistically inclined, we're seeing teams that are going out, and the Red Sox in particular. Chris Sale's last start, he pitched 1 inning. He sucked in that 1 inning, and certainly he would have gone longer in the game had he pitched better. But we've seen in other starts, Red Sox pitcher struggles early. They're taking him out of the game quickly. The first start that Eduardo Rodriguez made against the Rays, and it took him out. I think it was 1 2/3 innings. So they've been really cautious with the starting pitchers. And that is also more reason to think that even though, in theory, for most of the regular season, the floor for pitchers is much higher than the hitters, I kind of think those ideas go a little bit out the window when you start to see how teams are utilizing their starting pitchers in the postseason. But one other thing we're going to ask you, Framber Valdez versus Chris Sale, if you could only roster one of them in a tournament, which would be your preferred option? So
one other thing to your point about Sale's last start, I think that's a perfect example sort of what I was getting to as well. Clearly, if that's a regular season game and Chris Sale has that first inning, obviously Chris Sale's not going to be giving you a good start that day. He lost like 7 points in the first inning, but chances are he's going to go back out there, and more often than not, he's going to get it together and he's going to get you like 8, 10 fantasy points. Whereas here, it's just like, yeah, okay, you're done. Like that's it. You're not going back out there. And so it does lower the floor, like you were saying. And I think, also when stuff like that happens in the middle innings, that's kind of why the ceiling, the chances of having a big game are a little bit lower. Between the two pitchers, I would still lean towards Sale just because I think the strikeout stuff is better. I think Framber Valdez is a good real life pitcher. He does an excellent job of getting ground balls, but just from a raw upside standpoint, only a 21.9% strikeout percentage for Valdez this year, 28.4% for Sale. And that's, I think, actually a little bit like artificially low because he had that one game against, I think it was Baltimore, where he just like struck out nobody. And he didn't make enough starts this year for that to really be washed out yet. So just from a strikeout standpoint, the matchup is not ideal, but neither pitcher has a good matchup here. I'd be more inclined to go to Sale just because I think he's the one that's more likely to go out there and just rack up Ks.
Yeah, I think that Chris Sale, I've made fun of him a little bit online in terms of just being like, hey, Chris Sale sucks. If Chris Sale's coming into the game and really for Boston, bet Tampa Bay in this game, which to an extent, I'm a little bit over exaggerating because the numbers for Chris Sale this year aren't that terrible. I just think relative to what Chris Sale has been in the past, he's not that guy anymore. And it makes sense that he wouldn't be that guy anymore. He missed basically 2 full seasons because missed 2 full seasons or, like 1 and 3/4 season due to arm injuries. He comes back and his numbers, once again, they were not awful. He had a 3.49 expected ERA, 3.69 FIP, but it just wasn't the Chris Sale who was an elite starting pitcher we've seen in the past. He still had a 28.4% strikeout rate. So of the two, I agree with you. I prefer Chris Sale just because of the strikeout upside. When Framber Valdez only had a 21.9% strikeout rate this year. So Chris Sale is certainly my preferred starting pitching option of the two. And then I also want to ask you, just kind of looking through some of the ownership, how much merit is there to just building lineups that don't have either of the starting pitchers, or is it something that you would probably still want to play one or the other? Because, I mean, at least in terms of ownership, the easiest way to differentiate yourself if you don't play any of the starting pitchers and you're paying high priced hitters, that's just something people generally aren't doing.
In tournaments, I think it's fine, especially on a slate like this. I mean, we have Valdez projected for 12.9 DraftKings points. We have Sale at 12.7. It's not like either of these guys are really, they're both projected for less than a home run, right? Like some of these slates, you've gotten the pitchers projected 15, 16 points. If you have both pitchers up there, it starts to become a little bit more difficult, I think, to get away from both of them. But here, when you factor in the ownership as well, it's not, I'm not saying that I think it's likely the winning lineup doesn't have either starting pitcher, but you can certainly see a path to success. And when you factor in the ownership, it's a pretty easy way to differentiate when you know that, basically half of the field is going to have both, at least one of the two pitchers. So that's, one really, really easy way to do it. And it's just one of those, we talk about it a lot in tournaments. You should be willing to make trade-offs on your medium projection, as long as you still have a relatively easy path to, getting first place. And I think that you still do here. All that you basically need to happen is either starting pitcher pitches well and, the offenses do well. That's not the most likely outcome, but it's certainly, on the table when you're talking about these two offenses.
Yeah, for sure. It's two of the best offenses in baseball. And the Houston Astros, of course, we've never missed. We've been higher on the Houston Astros offenses than pitchers going against them. So,
yeah.
Why not? If this is the last baseball show you and I do together this year, why not go down the ship with the Houston Astros and their offense here? But let's transition to talking about some of the high-priced hitters. Unless, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of pitching here?
No.
All right. So the high-priced batters now. We've got Jose Altuve is the most expensive hitter on the slate at 9,800. And let's look at these hitters who are all 9K and above. So that's Kyle Tucker, JD Martinez, Kyle Schwarber, Jose Altuve. All of these hitters, obviously some of the best hitters in baseball, guys like Kyle Schwarber, JD Martinez, a ton of power upside. They're not picking up very much ownership on the slate. And it's because everybody's paying up for the pitching. So when we've got the two pitchers 50+% owned, that means that we've got Jose Altuve 21%, Schwarber 14%, JD Martinez 16%, Kyle Tucker 14%. Is there anything about these hitters that really stands out to you in terms of what their ownership is?
Not individually, I don't think, because, again, like the matchup isn't good for them, but they have so much power upside collectively that I think it's more so, I just like the idea of getting a lot of as many good hitters here as you can. Like I'm not looking at, JD Martinez versus Xander Bogaerts and saying, I think Martinez is the guy, or, I think Bogaerts is the guy. It's more so just the given that, Martinez is getting 16% ownership and Bogaerts is getting 20. I would just like in tournaments to be getting more of those guys. Same can be said for Kike, for Altuve, for Tucker, Devers, Schwarber. Like these guys are such good hitters that the way I see this slate from a tournament standpoint is that it's going to be easier to win. It's going to be easier to get first place if your lineup is like shaded towards having the best hitters you can get and the game ends up being high scoring. I think you're gonna have an easier path to winning than if you go with pitchers, cheap hitters, and assume it's gonna be, a 3-2 game or a 4-3 game or whatever. I think you're gonna have so much like congestion at the top of leaderboards in that case that it's gonna be really, really tough. So it's more so that I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time singling out, Bogaerts versus Martinez versus Devers. It's more so I just want to put myself, if I'm playing tournaments, in a position where if this is an offensive game, I have the right pieces, just, because I've spread my exposures out across all these guys.
Yeah, and then just looking also with the MVP or the captain ownership between these guys, we've got Jose Altuve 4%, Kyle Schwarber 1.8%, Martinez 2%, Kyle Tucker 3%. So I'm actually a little surprised by that Kyle Tucker is picking up, that much more. I mean, it's relative, but like double the ownership of Kyle Schwarber when they're projected for the same utility ownership. But that aside, I think in terms of high end guys, that is a way to certainly differentiate some of the lineups. And then as we go down the pricing tier, here's somebody that does stand out to me as an individual play that stands out to me a little bit from this standpoint. Yordan Alvarez is one of the best overall hitters in baseball. And maybe people are just looking at the left versus left matchup and saying like, hey, I don't want to roster Yordan Alvarez against the lefty, but a couple of things. Number one, Chris Sale's likely not going to be in this game for very long. Yordan Alvarez is going to face a right-handed pitcher. 2, Yordan Alvarez hits left-hand pitching extremely well. And then also the Red Sox have a crappy bullpen that he's going to face at some point. But Yordan Alvarez might very well be the best overall hitter in this game. The price point at 7,800 just doesn't make much sense to me. And he's not picking up ownership as if he's some crazy value bat. 27% for him. The guys who are priced around him, Alex Bregman, 34%. We've got 27% going to Hunter Renfroe. Carlos Correa, 24%. Would you be on the same page as me and just say that the price point for Yordan Alvarez is not really all that sensible considering how good he's been?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I would say Bregman is also underpriced. So like I understand why Bregman's getting more ownership. But when you compare Yordan Alvarez, especially to the Red Sox hitters mostly, but also like Jose Altuve, Jose Altuve is good. Certainly. He's not $2,000 better than Yordan Alvarez, especially from an upside standpoint. Alvarez gives you so much power. So, and like you were saying, I really don't care too much about the lefty-lefty matchup because I'm not looking at any of these Astros hitters and saying, oh, I like how they match up against Chris Sale. I don't care if they're batting right-handed or left-handed. I don't like how they match up. Chris Sale, when he's on, is really good. And if he is at the top of his game today, the Astros aren't going to score a lot of runs and it's not going to really matter. But if you're thinking of it in terms of Chris Sale pitching poorly and getting out of the game, it doesn't, again, the lefty-lefty matchup isn't going to matter. Maybe Alvarez gets one at bat against Sale. Who cares? So that's kind of the thing for me that you want to keep in mind. And it gets away from medium projections is you have to think about this more than just, it's a bad matchup against Sale, because it's a bad matchup for everyone on Houston. It's a bad matchup for everyone on the Red Sox. It's more so about saying, okay, every pitcher, no matter how good they are, they're still going to have some, C+ level games where they just don't have it. And when that happens, how can I put myself in a position to make the most money? And so it's more thinking along those lines than saying, oh, Alvarez is a lefty and Sale is lights out against lefties, so I can't play him. To me, that just doesn't really matter in this situation.
Yep, I totally see it the same way. And we'll talk about some more of these hitters in a second. But first, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market. If you guys are not familiar with Jock Market, this is a totally different way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of there being any kind of lineups or salary restrictions, this is basically a stock market, but for athletes. And we have a great deal going on there also. If you make your first deposit over at Jock Market, use the promo code Awesemo and you get $50 bonus on your first deposit. Also, if you are new playing in the NFL streets over on Jock Market, they will refund your first slate up to $100. So if you go out, you don't do well on your first run on Jock Market playing NFL, you get your money back up to $100. So totally risk-free. You also get that deposit bonus when you deposit for the first time. So a lot of reasons to download the Jock Market app and go check that out. All right. So getting back to these hitters, going through the ownership here, we mentioned Alex Bregman a second ago being a little more popular than Yordan Alvarez. And of the good hitters in this game, Alex Bergman is the most popular. It's currently projected for 34.4% ownership. I haven't hand-built lineups yet, but I have a feeling that just the construction of Framber Valdez, Chris Sale, McCormick, Arroyo, Bregman goes together very easily, and then people just plug in whatever hitter is left. But what do you make of Alex Bregman when he is going to be in about a third of the field's lineups? Does that make him a little bit less of a priority play relative to some of the other top bats in this game?
So he's someone where I would say, I think in tournaments, it matters a lot what the rest of your lineup looks like. If I have a tournament lineup that has, like Sale and Valdez or, one of them at captain or whatever, I'm going to be less inclined to also go to Bregman and more inclined to be mixing in some of the lower owned hitters. I mean, Carlos Correa, for example, is only $200 or $400 more expensive on DraftKings, but he's only getting 24% ownership. Kike Hernandez is reasonably priced at 8,400. He's getting a lot less ownership than Bregman. So I think Bregman is one of the best combinations of cheap salary and actual good hitter, as opposed to like Christian Arroyo. But he's still there's so many good hitters in this game that if I am playing popular pitchers in my lineup, like you only get 6 spots. So it gets pretty tough to say, oh, well, I'll just differentiate elsewhere. There's just not that many other places you can do it. So I would lean towards, if I'm going to the pitching, then really wanting to get lower owned hitters. If you don't have the pitching though, you can do whatever the hell you want because such a high percentage of the field is going to have at least one pitcher that if this game just goes sideways and neither starting pitcher does well, you're kind of just jumping over everybody anyway. So in lineups where, I don't have a pitcher or I don't have a pitcher captain, Bregman, I think is going to look really, really good.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And once again, the 7,600 price tag for Alex Bregman, that's too cheap relative to his talent level. The same goes for Yordan Alvarez at 7,800. Overall, though, for me, I think Yordan Alvarez is the better hitter of the two, and he's also a little bit less owned. So to me, he's the slightly more preferred tournament option. But like you said, the ownership as a whole becomes less of a concern if you don't have the starting pitchers in the lineup, because you already have a very different lineup in that kind of situation. So let's move down now and talk about the value bats. And how do you want to handle some of these guys when they are so popular and frankly aren't that great of hitters? We've got Chas McCormick at 4,400, projected for 48% ownership. Christian Arroyo at 4,000, projected for 46% ownership. Martin Maldonado at 4,000, a little bit less popular, 30%, but still. These are hitters who are generally not the most popular hitters on individual MLB slates. But what is happening here? Everybody's playing Framber Valdez. Everybody wants to play Chris Sale. And then people look at the lines like, oh, I don't have that much salary left, therefore I have to look for cheap hitters. And people just go to Maldonado, Chas McCormick, Christian Rowe, because those are the only available cheap hitters we have when we're looking at what the current projected lineup is. So how do you handle hitters like this that are the only cheap hitters we have to choose from, but are also this popular?
So in tournaments, in cash games, you're going to use them because, again, you're just trying to get whatever floor it is that the pitchers offer you. But in tournaments, I think that they kind of go hand in hand with the pitching. When you, or if you're building lineups where you're not getting to both pitchers, or you're not getting to pitcher captain or whatever, then you're not going to have the need to go down to those guys. And it ends up being an added bonus because not only are you getting away from the highly owned pitchers, but you're getting away from the highly owned guys who can't really hit. You know, if Christian Arroyo goes out there and actually scores a lot of fantasy points, then you kind of just take your loss and move on to the next one. More often than not, it's the thinking is that, you know, Arroyo himself, it doesn't really matter what he does, it's what else he's getting in your lineup. But when everyone is building, or a large percentage of the field is building that same that same roster construction, it's like an added bonus when you can say, okay, well, I'm getting away from the pitchers, but also I get to not roster Martin Maldonado and Christian Arroyo and these guys who most likely are not going to do very well because they're not nearly as good of hitters as most of the guys in the game. So I don't really think, you know, like, I'm not saying you wouldn't want any of them, but I would expect if I'm getting away from the pitching, that I'm also getting away from the McCormick, Arroyo, Maldonado guys and turning that into hitters that are just, you know, better and lower owned.
Yeah, it is just a crazy amount of ownership going to these guys. But I'll ask you, would there be any interest in playing these guys in a lineup that doesn't have a starting pitcher? Just from a standpoint of, you have to assume that the majority of lineups with Framber Valdez and Chris Sale, they're going to have at least one or two of these value bats. However, if people are fading the pitchers, there's almost no reason to go to these value bats. So does that kind of make them more interesting just from a standpoint of, hey, you know what, I'm going to leave a couple $1,000s of salary on the table and roster Chas McCormick in a lineup without Framber Valdez and Chris Sale, just because now let's say that Chas McCormick goes out and picks up a couple hits, he's basically only going to be in lineups with the starting pitchers.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. If you, for one, if you're playing 150 lineups, there's no reason to just not have any of those guys because, like you were saying, you can still use them in a lineup that doesn't have pitching, and it's going to be a contrarian build. But also, some of those lineups you build without pitching are potentially still really expensive. Like if you're growing, you know, Devers, Schwarber, Altuve or something, in lineups like that, you will still need savings, and those guys will fit in. But then, you know, in lineups where you're going, you know, more to the mid-range guys, if you're just going like Alvarez, Bregman, Correa, you know, you wouldn't necessarily need to get to Arroyo and McCormick. So I still think there's going to be builds where, even if you're not using pitching, where you need the savings. But then even if you didn't need the savings, you'd still want at least some of those guys, because again, at least if you're playing 150 lineups, like I think if you're playing, you know, 10 lineups, 20 lineups, the first priority I would have is just making lineups that have good hitters and, you know, not worrying about those guys. But if you're playing 150 lineups and you are using a strategy where you're underweight on the pitching, the last thing you really want is to put yourself in a position where if the hitting goes off, you don't have the right hitters. You know, you're going to want, I think, to still be getting to all of the hitters, even if you're prioritizing the best hitters, because you're kind of just trying to put yourself in a position where the game goes a different way than is being projected. I really want to just have as many combinations of you know, as many chances to be right in that particular like game flow, for lack of a better word. I don't really want to be saying, okay, well, if there's a lot of offense in this game, then I'm still sure that Maldonado and Arroyo and McCormick don't do anything, because there's a decent chance that they do in that type of game. So they're not the priorities, but they're still guys that, as you're playing more lineups, I think you would want to get to.
Yep, that all makes sense to me. And by the way, guys, if you are not thrilled with playing a one-game baseball slate, good news, because there's a 3-game hockey slate also, and we've got tools and everything you need to win at NHL DFS over on Awesemo.com. You get started with our NHL DFS package for only $3 when you use the promo code CROSSCHECK. That is all one word, CROSS, COROSSCHECK. That's CROSSCHECK. And at checkout, that'll get you 75% off your first week of Awesemo plus NHL. And we've really got everything there. I know that Adam's had success in the past playing NHL DFS. I have as well. And guess what? I don't know anything about NHL, and I assume Adam does not either, but you don't really need to when you have some of the tools we have on the site. Stuff like the top stacks tool, which we also have for baseball, super popular for NHL, is something that I used a couple of days ago, helped me a little bit with my hockey lineups. And this is an offer that is only valid through October 18th. Stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo Plus today. That is promo code CROSSCHECK. All right, so jumping back over to baseball, Adam, is there anything in terms of the DFS slate that we have not mentioned yet that you want to bring up? If not, I'll bring up some of the prop tools we have over on the site.
No, I think we pretty much covered it from a DFS standpoint. Just, that the median projections are going to drive ownership, but as is usually the case in baseball, but especially more so on a 1-game slate, just kind of finding alternative paths to, how the game could play out, I think is a really strong approach.
All right, so jumping into the props. So also, guys, if anybody's watching and they have any questions, do us a favor, throw those questions in, because we could definitely use the rest of our time here to answer those. If not, you will forever have to hold your silence, because Adam and I are going to have to end the show eventually. We can't just sit here without things to talk about for another 40 minutes. But I'll jump into the prop tools right now. Framber Valdez, over under 4.5 strikeouts for him. This isn't something I would feel super confident in betting. However, we do have the under as a slight lean in our MLB prop betting tool. The under hitting 60% of the time. That is an 11% expected ROI. I think just given how we've seen pitchers used in the playoffs, and also that Framber Valdez is not necessarily the best strikeout pitcher, 22% K rate, and the Red Sox have a good offense. If I had to pick one side of this prop, it would be the under 4.5 strikeouts for Framber Valdez, but not really a strong lean for me, and not something that I'm going to be betting on. But do you feel any differently about over under 4.5 Ks for Valdez?
No, I think I feel exactly the same. It's not one that I would be seeking out to bet, but if I had to, I just think that there's sort of more paths to him failing to get there than there are for him like drastically exceeding it. So on average, I think it's a good one, but I think the range of outcomes probably skewed a little bit more towards the under.
All right, and then jumping into the MLB player prop for the home runs, we've got Hunter Renfroe here. At plus 450 to homer, we have him with a 20% chance of homering today. So that is a slight expected ROI at 12%. If I had to pick one player to homer in this game from the Red Sox side of the game, it probably would be Hunter Renfroe. He's hit left-handed pitching so well over the course of his career. And Framber Valdez, not the easiest pitcher to hit a home run off of, just based on his high ground ball rate. However, when the ball's hit in the air against him, it generally tends to lead to some damage. So Framber Valdez this year did have a 70.3% ground ball rate, but a 21.4% home run to fly ball rate. And for his career, he has a 20.3% home run to fly ball rate. So Hunter Renfroe, a hitter, is certainly capable of getting the ball in the air. If he does it against Valdez, seems like there's a pretty good chance to homer. So I don't mind the plus 450 prop there to hit a home run, but are you willing to take any kind of stand against Valdez considering his high ground ball rate?
I'm with you on Renfroe. I like Renfroe against the guy that's most likely going to let him put the ball in play. He can do, Valdez is really, really good at getting ground balls, but we know Renfroe can get the ball in the air. He has tons and tons of power. So I'm with you there. I think he looks like probably the best home run option.
All right. So that is going to do it for us today, guys. We'll just mark it down. Hunter Renfroe. That's going to be our home run pick for today. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Do us a favor on the way out. Hit the like. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've still got college football content. We've got NFL lineup building show coming up. You want access to all that. So do us a favor, like the video, and good luck today.